You're probably familiar with David Fincher's 2007 movie, Zodiac, which is of course about the Zodiac Killer. However, I'm willing to bet that you're not so familiar with the very first movie about the Zodiac Killer. You might think it's Dirty Harry, which was famously inspired by the Zodiac, but it's not. The appropriately titled film, The Zodiac Killer, also sometimes just known as Zodiac, released just a few months before Dirty Harry. And while David Fincher had the goal of presenting a mostly accurate version of the Zodiac murders and subsequent investigation, the 1971 Zodiac Killer movie was not really worried about being accurate or realistic at all, as it was made with a far different goal in mind: catching the real Zodiac Killer. The year is 1971. For the last 3 years now, an elusive serial killer known as the Zodiac stalks the San Francisco area. Although he hasn't been known to have committed any murders for some time now, he was still in frequent communication to the press and police of San Francisco through plenty of cryptic letters sent in 1970 with a handful in early 71 as well. Also in San Francisco in the late 60s and early 70s was a chain of pizza places called Pizza Man. They were owned by Tom Hanson, a local entrepreneur and aspiring filmmaker who also ran a handful of KFCs, A&Ws, and Chicken Delights in the area. When he wasn't working at his restaurants, he was working on movies. He had spent some time working mainly as an actor on several low-budget exploitation movies and got to know a lot of people within the California independent film scene at the time. And in the early 70s, he discovered that his underwriter for Pizza Man had gone bankrupt and basically wasn't going to be able to pay him all of the money he should have made from Pizza Man, and the entire chain was probably going to go under. So with his fast food career quickly going down the drain, he decided that now would be a better time than ever to try and really break into the film industry. However, Hanson was also deeply disturbed and shocked by the recent Zodiac murders, as most of California was, and had a desire to catch the Zodiac Killer. So he started to come up with a plan to catch this killer, which would end his violent spree and also make Hanson rich and famous in the process. And that plan was to make a movie about the killer, which would surely draw him in so Hanson could have the opportunity to catch him. Because Hanson worked on a lot of these independent movies already, he was pretty aware of the fact that most of these ultra-low budget exploitation films were just not good. So he felt that his Zodiac Killer movie really didn't have to be good as long as it could just get attention. The real killer, who was known to like attention from the media, would have to come see this movie, and with the money he made from catching the killer, Hanson could start making real movies. So Hanson scraped up a budget of $13,000, gathered some of his actor friends for the main roles, and filled the rest of the cast with random strangers off the street, and production got started. Nobody really got paid for this, including Hanson himself. The movie itself is interesting. It's a fairly entertaining movie that consists of a handful of real events and a lot of really bizarre assumptions about who the Zodiac Killer may actually be and why he killed people. It would function pretty well as a cheap drive-in or grindhouse movie and is also interesting for being an early sort of proto-slasher film. The pacing is all over the place, as it often is with a lot of these types of films, because they just don't have the budget for a killer to run around and murder people with good gore effects for a whole hour and a half. So they fill in a lot of the time with boring scenes of police officers and other random people talking about nonsense, basically.
Speaking of pigs.
The film begins with a message from reporter Paul Avery, who was heavily involved with the case at the time and actually worked as a consultant for the film. Then the movie gets right into the violence, with the Zodiac Killer murdering a random woman with this awful fake nose and mustache disguise. Then it goes into some creepy old guy talking about how he likes younger women, and then we never see him again.
Once they get over 20, they're all no damn good.
I don't like where this is going.
What's so special about 20?
Well, you see, when they get 20, that's the turning point. The turning point to disaster. Chinese got it put right. They call it the year of the dog. Or better explained in English, the birth of the bitch.
You don't mind if I get my claws on some of them young ones, do you, Doc?
Stop!
Be my guest. And hey, if you get any leftovers or extras, remember,
Stop!
I like them plump and juicy and dumb.
FBI should be knocking on his door any minute now.
Then there's an extended period of time where we focus on this toupee-wearing scumbag who gets drunk and eventually just takes his daughter hostage and gets shot to death by the police. None of this really has an effect on the story. Sure, the Zodiac Killer was friends with this guy, but really, did we need any of this? After this is when we get into the real Zodiac stuff, and it definitely gets better once all of this junk from the beginning is out of the way. It combines real Zodiac murders with several fictional murders as well and tries to come up with a motive, showing the Zodiac to be a Satanist who has some kind of psychological issues from his father, who's now in a mental institution. And it's sort of implied this is why the Zodiac goes on his rampage. The movie is mostly incompetent, but occasionally they accidentally get a good shot or have some genuinely disturbing scene, like this scene with the couple that gets murdered by the lake, which we also see in Fincher's Zodiac. I think that the grimy, grungy look of the old 16mm film just adds to this scene. It feels like you're watching a snuff film or something. Especially knowing that this was a real murder that took place, it's just kinda gross. There's also this scene where the police just run out of ideas and go to some weird psychic to try and figure out why the murders are happening. It's really odd, but I think I kinda love it for some reason. The movie ends with the Zodiac getting away with everything, as he still wasn't caught when they finished filming. He has a monologue about how people like him live among us, and we can never tell when somebody we might know could really be a horrible, insane person. At the very end of the film, it says, "This is not the end." And at this point, Hanson had the intention of filming the killer after catching him. Hanson would somehow make him confess to everything and put the confession right here at the end of the movie, and that would be the true ending. And that, of course, never happened. However, his plan may have almost worked. After finishing the film, Hanson was able to get it to premiere at the RKO Golden Gate Theater's upstairs screen. Golden Gate would get about 80 to 90% of the box office, with Hanson getting whatever was left. But Hanson figured that that wouldn't really matter because he would get rich after catching the Zodiac. It was a fairly well-publicized event, so Hanson was confident that the killer would, in fact, show up to see the movie. So Hanson hatched a foolproof plan to catch the murderer with 5 other guys. Bob Jones, who played Grover in the movie, Hal Reed, who played the Zodiac, Art Porine, Hanson's brother-in-law, Ray Cantrell, the film's writer, and Ray Lynch, who played one of the cops. Hanson set up a giveaway. One lucky member of the audience would win a new motorcycle. He managed to talk motorcycle company Kawasaki into donating a motorcycle for this giveaway. Audience members would arrive to the theater, and after purchasing a ticket, they would be given a small card that had a serial number and a prompt on it. I think the Zodiac kills because they would have to write their answer to this prompt on the card to be entered into the giveaway. Hanson also specified that each audience member would only be allowed to have 1 card. They should never be given more than 1. They would then drop their card into a box, and at the end, 1 random audience member would win the motorcycle and be called to the back of the theater. But what the audience did not know was that these weren't really chosen randomly, because there was actually somebody hiding in that drop box. He would be holding a sample of the Zodiac's handwriting so that he could quickly compare it to every single card that was dropped in. If a card matched the handwriting, the card reader had some kind of buzzer connected to the ice cream freezer that was directly across from him. This ice cream freezer was actually also brought in by Hanson, and had secretly been hollowed out so that somebody could hide in the bottom of it and look out the vent. This meant that when the buzzer was hit, the man in the freezer would have to quickly get a look at the person who dropped the card in, so that after the serial number of the card was called, they could confirm it was the right guy. At the same time, Hanson was in the lobby interviewing people who claimed to have known the Zodiac, interviewing over 20 different people with wildly different stories, none of which really added up to anything. The other 3 guys would then be waiting in the wings, some of them armed with guns, ready to spring into action after the Zodiac would be called back. The 6 guys would then take turns in each position. One of the rotations took longer than it should have for some reason, and Ray Cantrell ended up in the freezer for way longer than he should have, which literally almost killed him. Coincidentally, this just happened to align with someone coming along and writing, "I was here, the Zodiac," on a card. So because Ray Cantrell was about to pass out, nobody saw who dropped the paper in that box. However, later on when Hanson went to the bathroom, he was stunned when another man came in and said, "You know, real blood doesn't come out like that." When Hanson turned around, he claims to have seen someone who looked exactly like the face of the Zodiac Killer from the posters. So, he screamed and ran right out of the bathroom. He then got the other 5 guys together and grabbed the alleged Zodiac from the bathroom. They dragged him into the office and held him there for questioning. The alleged killer put up no resistance at all. They found a seat in the theater where he sat alone and found 2 torn up cards under his seat, meaning he may have taken up to 3 different cards. Hanson questioned him about these 2 and the "I was here" card, but the man claimed to know nothing about any of them. Hanson claimed that his brother was Paul Stein, a victim of the Zodiac. Hanson asked some more questions, and they found that this man had no identification on him but claimed to be a paratrooper in Vietnam and had only just returned home. They also found out that he was staying in the Astoria Hotel, so after they let him go, they decided to call his hotel room. If he wasn't there, they planned on breaking in and searching the place. Hanson called the room several times, and before breaking in, he called one final time at 1:30 a.m., and the man answered. Hanson was caught off guard and just apologized. The alleged killer said, "Oh, it's okay, I'm fine, no bother." Hanson hung up and pretty much gave up at this point. However, Hanson did have one final encounter with the alleged killer. The man showed up at the theater one more time, silently appearing at the office while Hanson was counting tickets. He startled Hanson yet again, asking how he was doing and said he was on his way to a job interview. Hanson wished him luck but never saw him again. Obviously, they never caught the Zodiac Killer. To this day, the identity of the killer is still debated. But after this initial premiere run at the Golden Gate Theater, Hanson would get the film shown across the country by distributor Audubon Films. But they just distributed it as a standard exploitation film to drive-ins, grindhouses, and other low-budget theaters, without all these serial killer catching antics. Most of the cast and crew would continue to work in the low-budget film scene, with Hanson himself directing one more indie movie, A Ton of Grass Goes to Pot, before seemingly retiring from show business. Hanson's Zodiac Killer movie would fall into obscurity, but eventually get re-released on home video by Something Weird Video, the company famous for initially unearthing many of these exploitation oddities in the 90s. And just a few years ago, it would get a very nice HD Blu-ray transfer from an original 16mm film print by the American Genre Film Archive. So now you can watch the Zodiac Killer in all its glory at your own home. Or if you just happen to own a movie theater, you can rent a copy from the archive and show it there. Maybe even set up your own trap. Although legally I'm not advising that, I'm just saying that it could be done. Because, as the film says, the Zodiac Killer could still be out there, somewhere among us, and we wouldn't even know it.